Join us for an inspiring story about William Porter, a high-powered executive whose life is transformed by an unexpected encounter with Ava Thomas, an attorney dedicated to community change. What begins as a tense interaction on a flight becomes a journey that challenges William's views on success and power. As he navigates new partnerships, personal sacrifices, and moments of revelation, William must decide if he's willing to redefine what truly matters. Will his path lead him to lasting change, or will he return to the comfort of his old ways? Discover how ambition, empathy, and resilience intertwine in this tale of growth and purpose. If you enjoy stories that make you think and feel, like, comment, and subscribe for more content. Dive in and see where William's journey takes him. The sun cast its early light over Manhattan, the skyline glittering as if each window was an eye-opening to the new day. William Porter stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, his reflection sharp against the backdrop of the bustling city. In his hand was a cup of black coffee, its steam rising in lazy curls, the bitterness a comfort that anchored him before the day's onslaught. The digital clock on the counter blinked, reminding him that he had an important flight to catch. This wasn't just another business trip. It was a rare venture beyond the boardrooms of Manhattan to Atlanta, where a high-profile weekend gala would provide the perfect stage for strategic networking. He glanced at his reflection again, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored navy suit. Everything about him, from his pressed shirt to the gleaming watch on his wrist, spoke of power and precision. But beneath the surface, there was a simmer of restlessness, the kind that no deal or accolade seemed to satiate anymore. "Sir, the car is downstairs," came the voice of his assistant through the intercom. William acknowledged her with a brief nod, set down his empty cup, and strode out of his penthouse, the echo of his footsteps resonating through the marble hallway. Across town, Ava Thomas stood outside her brownstone, a faint smile playing on her lips as she looked up at the clear sky. Today's flight was more than just a trip. It was a reunion. She would join her husband, Daniel, in Atlanta ahead of her keynote speech at a major charity event. The cause, providing scholarships and mentorships to underprivileged students, was something she had built her career around, and with each step she felt the weight of her purpose pressing against her heart. She adjusted the strap of her carry-on bag, the subtle curve of her belly making her movements deliberate. Ava was 7 months pregnant, and every shift and stretch reminded her of the new life growing within her, a life she was fiercely protective of. A cab pulled up, its brakes squealing, and she climbed in, exchanging a warm smile with the driver. "JFK, please," she said, and the cab lurched into traffic, merging into the city's relentless tide. As the buildings blurred by, Ava's thoughts drifted to the challenges ahead. The whispers and glances she often attracted as a successful black attorney, combined with her poised confidence, were things she had long learned to navigate. But today, she felt particularly aware of the space she would occupy, seated in first class, among people who often underestimated her. JFK International Airport was a flurry of movement and sound, from the mechanical rumble of luggage carts to the overlapping announcements echoing through the terminals. William moved through security with an efficiency that bordered on impatience, his expression a mask of mild irritation. He was used to bypassing long lines and scanning crowds with a practiced disinterest, finding solace in the isolation his status provided. He glanced at his boarding pass, seat 3A. First class, of course. He stepped into the exclusive lounge, its quiet hum a reprieve from the chaos outside. Here, he felt in control, surrounded by fellow passengers who shared the same unspoken language of power. Meanwhile, Ava approached the gate, navigating the curious looks as she joined the line for priority boarding. There was a quiet determination in her as she moved, acknowledging the stares with a soft, almost imperceptible nod. When the call came for first-class passengers, she stepped forward, feeling the shift in energy as people registered her presence. William looked up from his phone as the boarding announcement crackled over the speakers. He rose and walked to the gate, joining the steady stream of passengers moving down the jet bridge. He kept his gaze forward, not noticing the woman who moved with the kind of quiet strength that disrupted even the most composed spaces. The cabin was a world of its own, filled with muted lighting and the soft creak of leather seats. William settled into 3A, adjusting his tie out of habit as he glanced out the window. The air around him seemed to hum with expectation as passengers filed in, greeted by flight attendants with practiced smiles. Ava stepped into the cabin, scanning for her seat. When she reached 3B, beside William, a fleeting look of surprise crossed his face. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a polite disinterest that masked his discomfort. He shifted slightly, turning toward the window to make more space, though the move carried an edge of detachment. "Excuse me," Ava said gently, maneuvering her bag and taking her seat with a practiced grace. The brief contact made William tense, an involuntary reaction that made Ava pause, eyes narrowing for the smallest moment before she looked away. The flight attendants moved efficiently, closing overhead bins and ensuring the passengers were settled. The engines roared to life, a low vibration that spread through the cabin as the plane pushed away from the gate. William felt the familiar tension of takeoff, his mind already drifting to the night ahead in Atlanta. But as the plane ascended, there was no escaping the presence beside him, a presence that seemed to shift the air in subtle, unsettling ways. As the plane leveled out at cruising altitude, the cabin hummed with quiet activity. Passengers adjusted their seats, and the soft clinking of glasses filled the space as flight attendants offered drinks. William accepted a sparkling water without looking up, his focus fixed on the tablet in front of him. Ava requested a cup of herbal tea, her voice smooth and steady. She settled back, resting a hand on her belly as she sipped, eyes scanning the pages of a journal she had brought along. The motion caught William's attention for a moment, but he quickly looked away, feigning interest in his work. "Long day?" The question came from an older woman across the aisle, who smiled at Ava with a warm, knowing look. Her gray hair was pulled back into a tidy bun, and her eyes were soft with the wisdom of years. Ava's expression brightened. "Yes, but it's good to be on the way. I'm speaking at a conference in Atlanta." "That's wonderful, dear," the woman said, glancing briefly at William, who remained rigidly composed. "It's good to see more young people leading the way." William's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The conversation, though innocent, grated against his sense of order. He was used to commanding spaces, not sharing them. He shifted in his seat, the motion drawing Ava's gaze for a fraction of a second before she turned back to her journal. The conversation between Ava and the older woman drifted into silence, but the atmosphere in the cabin had subtly changed. William's posture was stiff, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't fully articulate. Why did the exchange bother him? It was simple, polite, nothing that warranted the annoyance simmering under his skin. The flight attendant approached, her voice pleasant. "Would you care for dinner, Mr. Porter?" "No, thank you," William replied curtly, his tone sharper than intended. The attendant's smile faltered briefly before she nodded and turned away. Ava watched the exchange out of the corner of her eye. She could sense the tension radiating from William, each brusque movement a testament to whatever storm brewed inside him. It was a familiar energy, one she had encountered in boardrooms and courtrooms where assumptions sat heavy in the air, unchallenged but potent. "Everything all right?" she asked quietly, surprising even herself with the question. William's eyes snapped to hers, searching for a trace of sarcasm or judgment. Finding none, he nodded once. "Yes, fine." "Good," Ava said, returning to her reading, though her mind lingered on the interaction. There was a story there, one she didn't need to hear aloud to understand. The hours ticked by, marked by the soft chime of the seatbelt sign and the drone of the engines as the plane carved its way through the sky. The first-class cabin had settled into a hush, with most passengers lost in their own worlds. William's eyes occasionally flicked toward Ava, catching glimpses of her absorbed in her reading, the soft curve of her lips hinting at concentration or amusement. He frowned, more at his own interest than at her. Ava glanced up from her journal, catching William's reflection in the dark window. She noticed the subtle tightness in his expression, the way he shifted in his seat as if restlessness was second nature. Without speaking, She returned to her notes, jotting down thoughts for her upcoming speech. Words like hope, resilience, and legacy flowed onto the page, underscoring the themes she aimed to convey. William's phone buzzed with a new email notification, breaking his reverie. He scanned the message, a reminder about the evening's networking event in Atlanta. The anticipation of power plays and handshakes brought a familiar spark to his mind. Yet it felt oddly muted compared to the strange energy that had dominated his thoughts on this flight. Midway through the flight, turbulence shook the cabin, drawing collective gasps and startled expressions. William's hand gripped the armrest, his expression turning steely, while Ava instinctively placed a protective hand on her belly. The plane's trembling was brief, but it left a charge in the air. The elderly woman across the aisle spoke again, more to calm herself than anything. "Never quite get used to that, do you?" Ava smiled softly, her eyes kind. "No, but I try to remember it's just the sky reminding us who's really in charge." William's jaw clenched at the exchange. He despised feeling out of control, and the turbulence seemed to amplify everything unsettling about this flight. The small talk, the stolen glances, the unwanted reflections. He resumed his posture, eyes fixed on the tablet that now displayed a graph he couldn't focus on. As calm returned, Ava turned her gaze outside, the deep blue of the sky merging with scattered clouds. The moments of turbulence had stirred memories, from sleepless nights during law school to courtroom challenges where her confidence was tested. Strength, she had learned, was not just in how one stood firm, but in how one adapted when shaken. The flight attendant moved through the cabin, pausing to offer refills. She approached Ava and gestured to her tea. "Would you like some more?" "Yes, please," Ava said, her voice gentle. The attendant poured the tea and glanced at William, hesitant after their earlier interaction. "Anything for you, sir?" William shook his head with a curt smile, dismissing her before turning his attention back to the numbers on his screen. But the numbers blurred, his focus wavering. He couldn't shake the thought that he was watching something he didn't understand, a sort of ease that came not from power, but from presence. It irritated him and intrigued him in equal measure. Ava noticed the attendant's fleeting discomfort and glanced at William with quiet curiosity. She had spent her career dissecting subtle cues in people's behavior, reading between the lines in negotiations and arguments. What she saw in him was not new, but it was layered. A man used to command but caught off guard by something beyond his grasp. The flight attendant's return marked another quiet exchange. "Here you go," she said, placing the steaming cup of tea on Ava's tray. "Thank you," Ava replied, her fingers cradling the warmth. William sighed audibly, the sound soft but pointed. Ava looked over, a slight tilt of her head acknowledging his unspoken tension. They sat in silence for a moment, a conversation of glances and ambient noise passing between them. Finally, William shifted in his seat and broke the silence. "Are you speaking at the conference in Atlanta?" he asked, more out of an impulse to anchor the energy between them than genuine curiosity. Ava's eyebrows rose slightly at the unexpected question. "I am, actually. It's a charity event focused on educational programs for underserved youth." "Ah," William said, nodding as if he hadn't just learned something significant. He cleared his throat. "I'm attending a separate gala. Networking, mostly." "Of course," Ava said, her voice neutral, but with a hint of something that made William feel exposed, like she could see more than he wanted to show. Both events probably have the same goal in mind: connections, resources, building bridges. William looked at her, searching her expression for irony, but finding none. The words settled into the space between them, weighted with more meaning than he expected. "I suppose they do," he admitted, the concession surprising him with its sincerity. The flight entered its final leg, with the captain announcing their descent. Passengers began to stir, gathering books, adjusting their seats, and stretching limbs stiff from the journey. William's mind raced, not with the usual anticipation of his arrival, but with a strange curiosity about the woman beside him. Ava packed her journal into her bag, her movements deliberate. She could feel the subtle shift in William's demeanor, and knew enough to let it rest. Change, she had learned, was often unseen until it was ready to surface. As the plane descended, the patchwork of Atlanta came into view, a landscape of concrete and greenery split by winding roads. The skyline grew larger, its silhouette sharp against the fading light. William exhaled, realizing that he had been holding his breath. "Safe travels," Ava said, her voice soft but clear as they began the final approach. "Thank you," William replied, turning to look at her directly for the first time. "And good luck with your speech." Ava's eyes met his, a glimmer of warmth crossing her expression. "Thank you, Mr. Porter." For a moment, the divide between them felt narrower, a shared acknowledgement that spoke not of transformation, but of the possibility of it. The plane touched down, the landing gear hitting the tarmac with a bump that pulled everyone back into their own worlds. The first-class cabin filled with the sound of seatbelts unbuckling and the rustle of bags being retrieved. William stood, pausing to let Ava step into the aisle ahead of him. As she walked away, he felt the strange weight of the interaction settle in the space she left behind. And for the first time in years, William Porter wondered if there were other ways to measure success than by the numbers he had lived by. The plane taxied to a halt, the city lights of Atlanta casting soft reflections on the cabin windows. The passengers in first class began gathering their belongings, their movements efficient and familiar. William glanced at Ava one last time as she stood in the aisle, her bag securely over her shoulder. She exchanged polite nods with the flight attendants, her presence as composed and grounded as it had been throughout the journey. William let her walk ahead, watching as she was greeted by a tall man near the terminal entrance. He recognized Daniel Thomas immediately, CEO of a major airline and philanthropist whose name often appeared alongside Ava's in news articles focused on community development. The realization twisted in William's chest. This was not a woman simply passing through the city. She was integral to it. Daniel's eyes caught William's for a moment, offering a nod that was both acknowledgement and something more. A silent understanding that shifted the ground beneath William's feet. He returned the gesture stiffly, turning to face the steady stream of disembarking passengers as if their mundane actions could steady his own mind. As William moved through the terminal, the usual sounds of travelers, laughter, hurried conversations, the rolling of suitcases, washed over him. He walked with a practiced stride, head high, but his thoughts tangled and refused to settle. The simple, fleeting interaction with Ava and Daniel carried a significance he struggled to ignore. He made his way to the baggage claim where travelers milled about, some checking their phones, others watching the carousel's slow rotation with weary eyes. William stood back, his mind replaying the moments on the flight, the way Ava had handled herself, the ease with which Daniel had greeted her. It was as if they carried an inner certainty that made the usual markers of success, titles, wealth, influence, feel smaller in comparison. "William Porter?" A voice pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Josh, his Atlanta-based assistant, waiting with the efficient politeness that marked all his interactions. "Yes, Josh," William said, his voice more clipped than intended. He softened it with a quick nod. "Good to see you. Your luggage should be out shortly, and the car is ready when you are," Josh replied, gesturing toward the sleek town car parked outside, visible through the large glass windows of the terminal. "Thank you," William said, glancing one last time at the carousel before following Josh out to the waiting car. As they passed through the automatic doors, the warm Atlanta air wrapped around him, heavy and fragrant with the scent of magnolia and distant rain. It was grounding, a reminder that he was far from his skyscraper view in Manhattan. The car ride to the hotel was filled with the soft murmur of traffic and the faint notes of jazz playing from the radio. Josh drove with quiet competence, leaving William to stare out the window at the cityscape that unfolded in layers of light and shadow. Billboards advertised upcoming concerts, local restaurants, and community initiatives led by names he now recognized. Daniel and Ava Thomas. The sight deepened the crease between William's brows. The name carried a weight he had previously dismissed. Now it followed him like a whisper, each repetition deepening the curiosity and unease that had taken root on the flight. At the hotel, the lobby buzzed with life. The clinking of glasses and the soft rustle of designer dresses mixing with the smooth piano playing from a corner. William checked in, nodding absently at the receptionist's cheerful welcome. The suite was as he expected, pristine, luxurious, impersonal. He set his luggage down and crossed to the wide windows overlooking downtown Atlanta, the city pulsing with its own rhythm, indifferent to his moment of reckoning. The silence of the room pressed in, carrying an unfamiliar weight. For the first time, the solitude that had always felt like power now felt like absence. He turned away from the window, the ghost of Daniel's knowing nod flickering in his mind. The following day, William's schedule was packed with meetings and preparation for the evening gala. The hours passed in a blur of handshake deals, polished smiles, and carefully worded conversations. Yet, beneath the surface, his thoughts strayed to Ava. Her name kept appearing in discussions, references to her work in education initiatives and legal reforms that had caught national attention. During a break between meetings, William found himself opening an article titled, "Bridging the Gap: How Ava Thomas is Changing the Future for Underserved Communities." The piece was full of candid photos of Ava at community events, speaking with parents and students, her expression open and sincere. The more he read, the more the edges of his preconceptions began to blur. "Lost in thought, Mr. Porter." Josh's voice brought him back. He stood at the doorway, a folder in hand. "Just reviewing some material," William replied, closing the article with a tap and gesturing for Josh to come in. The rest of the afternoon passed in a series of talks that lacked the depth of the article he couldn't forget. That evening, William dressed in a tuxedo, the tailored fabric fitting like armor. The gala was held at a historic hotel downtown, its ballroom a spectacle of chandeliers and muted gold decor. Guests filled the space, exchanging laughs and networking in a dance as old as the city itself. William moved among them, switching to autopilot as he navigated conversations about market trends and investment strategies. The noise of polite chatter and the clinking of glasses enveloped him, until a sudden shift in the room's energy caught his attention. Ava and Daniel had arrived, their presence magnetic. Ava's dress was simple but elegant, a deep blue that contrasted beautifully with her skin and made her stand out without ostentation. Daniel, in a classic black suit, exuded the quiet confidence that William had come to recognize as genuine. They moved through the room together, stopping to greet guests and exchange pleasantries. The sincerity with which they spoke to each person, whether a major donor or a young volunteer, was striking. It was the kind of engagement that couldn't be faked. "William Porter," Daniel said, reaching out when he spotted him. The handshake was firm, a silent reiteration of the respect implied in their first nod. "Daniel," William replied, his tone steady. He nodded at Ava, who met his eyes without flinching. "It's good to see you," Ava said, her voice holding the same warmth he remembered from the flight, now colored with curiosity. "You too," William said, finding that the words carried a weight of truth. "I've been reading about the work you've been doing. It's impressive." "Thank you," Ava replied, a smile softening her features. "It's work that means everything to us." The conversation was brief, interrupted by the gala's MC announcing the beginning of the evening's program. As they moved toward their seats, William felt a spark of something unfamiliar, an urge to understand more. Not just about their work, but about why it mattered so deeply. The evening unfolded with speeches and presentations that highlighted the charity's impact. Testimonials from students and families punctuated the program, their stories resonating with the crowd. One young man, Tyrone, spoke about how the scholarship he received had given him the chance to pursue engineering, a dream that had seemed impossible before. William listened intently, each story peeling away another layer of his defenses. The narratives were not just statistics or faceless examples. They were lived experiences that challenged his long-held beliefs about success and merit. When Ava took the stage to deliver the keynote address, the room fell silent. She spoke with conviction, weaving personal anecdotes with a broader call to action. "Change isn't just measured in grand gestures," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd and pausing briefly on William. "It's found in the small, persistent steps we take to lift others as we climb." The applause that followed was thunderous, and for the first time in years, William found himself clapping not out of obligation, but from a place deeper than he expected. As the gala wound down, guests mingled and exchanged final words before drifting toward the exit. William approached the table where Ava and Daniel stood, surrounded by a few admirers who congratulated them on the evening's success. "Impressive speech," William said when it was his turn, his voice carrying a sincerity that surprised him. Ava nodded, her eyes curious but kind. "Thank you, William. I'd like to learn more," he added, the words out before he could second-guess them. "About the programs, the partnerships, maybe even how my firm could contribute." Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly, and Ava's expression softened into a smile that was genuine, hopeful. "We'd like that," she said. They exchanged contact details, and as William left the gala, the city felt different. The streets, with their shifting lights and hidden stories, seemed to pulse with a new kind of energy, one that whispered of change and connection. As he stepped into the waiting car, William felt the weight of the night settle into something almost comfortable. It wasn't resolution, but it was a start. The ride back to the hotel was quiet, the hum of the car's engine a low backdrop to William's thoughts. He leaned against the window, watching the city blur by, a mosaic of lights and motion that felt more alive than ever before. The memory of Ava's speech replayed in his mind, her words precise and layered with meaning. Change isn't just measured in grand gestures. It's found in the small, persistent steps we take to lift others as we climb. William had spent years measuring success in milestones and numbers. Tonight, he realized that while those achievements looked impressive from the outside, they lacked the deeper resonance that seemed to fill Ava's work. The evening had opened a door in his mind, and while he couldn't yet see what lay on the other side, he felt compelled to step through it. Back in his hotel suite, the city stretched out before him in a panorama of skyscrapers and streetlights. The room was spacious, but felt hollow, the silence now a reminder of everything that had shifted. He set his jacket on the back of a chair and loosened his tie, sinking into the armchair by the window. The buzz of his phone interrupted the quiet. It was a message from Marcus Hayes, a respected entrepreneur he had met at a networking event a year prior, who had always championed diversity and corporate responsibility. "Saw you at the gala tonight. It's about time we talked. Call me this week. Got some ideas you might be interested in." The message was a jolt, a push in the direction his mind had already started to wander. William stared at the screen for a moment before typing a quick response. "Will do. Thanks for reaching out." He set the phone down, feeling the pull of exhaustion mixed with anticipation. Sleep came in fits and starts, broken by the restless churn of thoughts. The next morning, William woke early, the first light of dawn painting the edges of the room in pale blue. He dressed in silence, the ritual methodical and familiar, but his mind was elsewhere. He walked to a nearby cafe for breakfast, needing the energy of people around him. The small space was filled with locals chatting over coffee, their voices mingling with the hiss of the espresso machine. William took a seat by the window, stirring sugar into his drink as he watched the street outside. The sound of laughter drew his attention. A group of students, backpacks slung casually over their shoulders, crossing the street. He wondered if any of them had benefited from the programs Ava and Daniel championed, if they carried the hope she spoke of so passionately. He sipped his coffee, a bitter tang that mirrored the questions he couldn't yet answer. "Excuse me, are you William Porter?" The voice, polite but curious, pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up to see a young man in a crisp suit, maybe in his mid-20s, standing by the table. "Yes, I am," William replied, setting his cup down. "I thought so," the young man said, a touch of awe in his expression. "I'm Tyrone, the student who spoke at the gala last night." Recognition sparked in William's mind. "Of course. Your story was inspiring." Tyrone smiled, a mix of pride and gratitude. "Thank you. It was an honor to share it. I just wanted to say that what your firm is considering doing, partnering with Ava's programs, it would mean a lot to students like me. I wouldn't be here without people who believed in investing in potential. The words settled heavily, resonating in a way that made William's chest tighten. Thank you for saying that, Tyrone. It's something I'm learning more about. They exchanged a few more pleasantries before Tyrone left, but the encounter stayed with William, replaying in the spaces between his thoughts. Later that afternoon, William finally called Marcus Hayes. The entrepreneur answered on the first ring, his voice as vibrant and engaging as William remembered. "William, good to hear from you," Marcus said. "Last night's event must have given you plenty to think about." "It did," William admitted, a rare confession from a man who thrived on control. "I wanted to ask about the ideas you mentioned. What kind of initiatives are you working on?" Marcus laughed, a sound filled with promise. "I was hoping you'd ask. We're developing a collaborative program that merges corporate mentorship with community outreach. It's aimed at creating sustainable pathways for students from high school through their early careers. Ava's involved, of course, and we're looking for partners who can offer more than just a financial boost. Real engagement, real mentorship." The line was quiet for a moment, the weight of Marcus's words settling in. William's instinct was to consider the implications, to weigh the cost against the return. But another part of him, a part he was just starting to listen to, nudged him forward. "I'm interested," William said, the words clear and decisive. "What would the next steps be?" "Let's meet next week," Marcus replied. "I'll bring Ava, and we can discuss it in detail." The call ended with a plan, but the real shift had already begun. William sat back, the city outside no longer just a backdrop, but a living, breathing testament to change. Before heading to another round of meetings, William received a message from Ava. The simplicity of it surprised him. "Thank you for last night. Looking forward to what's next." He stared at the words, feeling an unfamiliar sense of validation. He typed a reply and hesitated before hitting send. "The thanks go to you. Let's make it count." He pocketed his phone, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The day ahead was full of meetings, but for the first time they felt like steps, not just obligations. Steps toward something larger than himself. The following week, William found himself in an unfamiliar space. He sat in a community center conference room with walls decorated by student art projects and motivational posters. The air smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish. It was a far cry from the sleek boardrooms he was used to, yet it carried a different kind of energy, a blend of hope and determination. Ava and Marcus entered together, their conversation flowing easily until they spotted him. Ava's expression shifted to one of pleasant surprise, a subtle nod acknowledging his presence. "William," Marcus greeted, extending a hand. His grip was firm, grounding. "Glad you could make it." "Thank you for inviting me," William replied, the sincerity in his voice surprising him. Ava took her seat across the table, her eyes meeting his with an openness that was neither wary nor overly friendly. "It's good to see you again," she said, her tone measured but warm. The room filled as a few more participants joined. Local educators, program directors, and a handful of business leaders who had already committed to the initiative. The noise of conversation rose, peppered with laughter and the occasional ringing of a phone. Marcus cleared his throat, bringing the room to order. "Thank you all for coming. Today, we're discussing how to expand the Pathways to Progress initiative. Our goal is simple: provide mentorships, internships, and scholarships that create real, long-term opportunities." William's gaze drifted to Ava as she listened intently, jotting down notes and occasionally exchanging looks with Marcus that spoke of years of shared effort and vision. When it was her turn to speak, her words were concise but charged with conviction. "We're not just investing in students, we're investing in the future workforce, in communities that will thrive when given the chance," she said. Her eyes moved across the room, settling on William for a heartbeat before moving on. "This requires more than check writing. It requires presence and engagement." A wave of agreement passed through the room, small nods and murmurs of approval. William felt a shift inside himself, a loosening of old habits that had once kept him confined to safe, predictable actions. He raised his hand, the movement drawing curious looks. What would deeper engagement look like, he asked, his voice steady, inviting elaboration. Marcus leaned forward, eyes alight. Great question. It means showing up, not just sending a representative. It means being part of mentorship panels, speaking to students directly, offering them more than just a glimpse of a world they might think is closed to them. Ava's eyes met William's again, this time with a hint of approval. It means sharing your journey, she added, the wins and the failures. That's what makes it real for them. After the main meeting concluded, the participants broke into smaller groups for workshops. William found himself paired with Ava and a local educator named Linda, who ran after-school programs at nearby schools. The three sat at a round table surrounded by the quiet hum of other discussions. Linda was the first to speak, her voice full of warmth. We've seen incredible results when business leaders take the time to speak with students. Just a few words from someone in a suit can plant a seed that grows into a career. But it's the follow-up that matters. Students need to see it's not just lip service. I agree, Ava said, nodding. She turned to William, her gaze challenging but kind. This is where we need partners like you, not just as sponsors, but as participants. William's throat tightened. The idea of stepping out from behind the polished walls of his office and into a community center, speaking to teenagers who might question him or meet him with skepticism, it was daunting. But the spark from the gala still burned in him, pushing back against the doubt. I'm willing, he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. Tell me where you need me. Ava's expression softened, a small, approving smile curving her lips. Good. We'll start with the mentorship panels next month. Linda's eyes shone with hope. That's a great start. The students will love it. The weeks leading up to the mentorship panel were a blur of meetings, preparation, and internal pushback from some of William's partners who questioned the time and resources being devoted to non-revenue initiatives. Is this really where we should be focusing our efforts? James, one of the senior partners, asked during a strategy meeting. His voice was measured, but the challenge was clear. Yes, William responded, the weight of certainty pressing into his words. This is where we should be. It's about sustainability, creating a future where we're more than just numbers in a ledger. The room fell silent, the surprise visible in the eyes of his colleagues. It was the first time many of them had seen this side of him, and while some remained skeptical, others shifted in their seats. Considering the possibility, the day of the panel arrived, and the community center was alive with the sounds of students milling around, laughter, and the squeak of sneakers on tile floors. William stood near the entrance, smoothing the sleeves of his shirt as he watched Ava speak with a group of teenagers, her laughter light and unguarded. Marcus joined him, a grin spreading across his face. Nervous? He asked, the question teasing but empathetic. More than I thought I'd be, William admitted. Good, Marcus said, patting him on the back. That means you care. The panel began with introductions, each speaker sharing their background. When it was William's turn, he cleared his throat and looked out at the sea of young faces. Some eyes were curious, others indifferent, a few openly skeptical. I'm William Porter, and I've spent most of my career in finance, he began, his voice steady but carrying an edge of vulnerability. But today isn't about numbers. It's about stories, about the paths we take and the people who help us along the way. As he spoke, he noticed the subtle shifts in the students' expressions. The crossed arms began to relax, and eyes that had been scanning the room settled on him with interest. He shared not just his successes, but the mistakes he had made, the moments he wished he could go back and change. By the time he finished, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't the awkward quiet of disinterest, but the thoughtful pause of consideration. A hand went up in the second row, and a boy with close-cropped hair and a serious expression asked, "What changed your mind about doing this kind of work?" William's chest tightened, the question cutting through to the heart of things. He glanced at Ava, who watched him with an unreadable expression. "Someone showed me that success isn't just about what you take with you," he said, his voice low but strong. "It's about what you leave behind." After the panel ended, William stayed, mingling with students who came up to ask questions or share their aspirations. The air was full of energy, stories spilling out as teenagers spoke about their dreams of engineering, law, and even finance. Ava approached, arms crossed, but her eyes warm. "You did well," she said simply. "Thank you," William replied, a smile breaking through the tension that had coiled in him all day. "It felt good." "It should," Ava said. "This is where change starts. Not in conference rooms, but here. With them." Linda joined them, beaming. "The students loved it. I heard one of them say they're going to start a business club at school because of today." William felt a swell of pride that was different from the triumphs he was used to. It was quieter, but it resonated more deeply. That evening, William sat at his hotel room's small desk, the glow from the city outside casting a gentle light across the room. His phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, some expressing support, others questioning the time spent on what they still saw as a diversion. One message stood out. It was from Ava. "You stepped up today. It makes a difference," he typed back, fingers lingering over the keys before hitting send. "It's just the beginning. Let's see how far we can take this." As the city pulsed below, William felt something shift within him. The pursuit of success had always been about reaching higher, achieving more. Now it was about lifting others along the way. And as he leaned back, the weight of that realization settled comfortably, as though it had been waiting for him to notice all along. The morning sun streamed into William's office the next day, casting long, warm rays across the floor. The usual routine of his firm felt different. There was a buzz in the air that hadn't been there before. Conversations carried more than just the hum of business. There were mentions of the mentorship event, stories of students who had left impressions, their questions and excitement replayed by those who had witnessed it. William sat at his desk, the leather of his chair creaking slightly as he leaned back and read through an email from James, the senior partner who had voiced skepticism weeks earlier. The subject line read, "Thoughts on yesterday. William, I have to admit I was wrong about the time spent on these initiatives. The feedback has been positive, not just in terms of public relations, but in employee morale. We should talk more about integrating this into our firm's long-term strategy." "James?" William exhaled, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It was a small victory, but one that spoke of larger shifts. He picked up his phone and scrolled to Ava's number, debating whether to call or text. He opted for the latter. Positive responses coming in. "Looks like we're making a dent." Moments later, a reply buzzed on his screen. "That's what small steps do. Let's meet to plan the next one." The simplicity of her message carried weight, reminding him that change was an ongoing process, not a single event. They met the next day at a cafe not far from the community center. The space was lively, filled with the scent of fresh pastries and the gentle clink of ceramic mugs. Ava was already there, a notebook open in front of her, pen poised as if she'd been writing moments before he arrived. "Morning," she greeted, her smile quick and genuine. "Morning," William replied, taking a seat opposite her. He ordered a black coffee, his usual, but this time the bitterness of it felt welcome. A grounding note in the midst of change. Ava's notebook was filled with ideas, bullet points detailing future workshops, panel discussions, and potential partnerships with other businesses. William's eyes skimmed the list, impressed by the thoroughness. "You've been busy," he said, half smiling. Ava chuckled lightly. "This is just the first layer. If we're serious about scaling, we need to involve more voices, more sectors. Not just finance, but tech, engineering, arts, all of it." William nodded, the scope of her vision unfolding before him. It was ambitious, but he found himself drawn to the challenge. "Then let's start by reaching out to partners I know in those sectors," he said. "I can connect us with CEOs who might be willing to get on board." Ava's eyes brightened, her pen tapping against the page. "That would be huge, and we need to make sure they know this isn't just for optics. The students see right through that." "Agreed," William said. "Authenticity is key. I think Marcus can help emphasize that when we pitch it." "Absolutely," Ava replied. They spent the next hour sketching out a plan, their conversation punctuated by moments of quiet, as they each considered the logistics and potential obstacles. When they stood to leave, there was an unspoken understanding between them, an acknowledgement of the shared commitment that went beyond professional obligation. As they walked out of the cafe, Ava's phone rang. She answered with a familiar ease that spoke to her ability to navigate both the personal and professional seamlessly. William waited, catching snippets of her conversation. Yes, I'll be back soon. Just wrapping up a meeting, she said before ending the call. Everything all right? William asked. Ava nodded, pocketing her phone. Just Daniel checking in. He's with the team at the office. William shifted, the mention of Daniel serving as a reminder of their shared history on the flight and at the gala. He realized he had come to respect Daniel not just as Ava's husband, but as an integral part of their collective work. The thought surprised him, how naturally it fit into the new shape his life was taking. Daniel's support seems unshakable, William said, his tone thoughtful. Ava smiled, the affection in her eyes softening her expression. It is. He believes in the work as much as I do. We push each other to stay grounded, keep moving forward. William nodded, feeling a pang of recognition. The kind of partnership Ava described was foreign to him, one not just of shared ambitions, but shared values. It made him wonder if he had ever allowed himself to pursue that, to see beyond the confines of his own power. You're lucky, he said after a moment, and Ava's smile widened. We are, she agreed, but luck has little to do with it. It's choices, day after day. The words stayed with him long after they parted, resonating like a bell struck in the quiet corners of his mind. The next few weeks were filled with meetings and planning sessions, each more dynamic than the last. William reached out to old contacts, leveraging relationships that had once been used solely for deals and mergers. The reactions were mixed. Some CEOs were intrigued, while others gave cautious, non-committal responses that spoke to the weight of shifting priorities. Are you sure this is the right move, William? James asked during a private meeting in William's office. His voice was neutral, but the skepticism was clear. I am, William replied, leaning forward. The initial response from the mentorship panels has already boosted our public profile. But it's more than that, James. This is about sustainable growth, not just for us, but for the community. The returns will come, but we have to play the long game. James looked at him for a long moment before nodding, though the doubt lingered in his eyes. If anyone can pull this off, it's you. Just know that not everyone sees it the way you do. William's jaw tightened slightly. He knew that not everyone would be on board, that change required patience and resilience. But he was prepared for that. He had spent years mastering strategies in business. Now it was time to master them in a new realm, one that required heart as much as it did mind. The following week, William stood in front of a room of potential partners. CEOs, heads of HR, and community leaders had gathered to hear about the expansion of Pathways to Progress. Ava and Marcus flanked him, their presence a silent reminder that this was a joint effort. He took a breath and began, speaking not just of statistics and potential returns, but of the stories that had brought him here. He spoke of Tyrone, of the students' faces at the mentorship panel, and of the quiet, persistent voice that had pushed him to step out of the comfort zone he had once mistaken for success. Success is not a solitary pursuit, William said, meeting the eyes of those in the room. It's measured by the footprints you leave behind and who follows in them. This initiative isn't just about charity. It's about investing in the future of our industries, our cities, and ourselves. The room was silent for a moment before the applause started. It grew steadily, and William felt a rush of validation that wasn't rooted in self-congratulation, but in the recognition that he was no longer moving alone. As the meeting concluded, Ava turned to him, a smile playing at her lips. "Welcome to the long game," she said, and for the first time, William felt not just the weight of responsibility, but the lift of shared purpose. A month later, the Pathways to Progress initiative was rolling out in ways William hadn't anticipated. The mentorship panels turned into workshops, then into full-day programs with interactive sessions where students shadowed professionals. Word spread quickly through local schools, and the waiting list for participation grew longer each week. William found himself in the middle of it all, visiting schools, shaking hands with principals, and speaking at community centers. It was a stark contrast to his previous life, where deals were sealed behind mahogany desks and boardroom doors. Here, the stakes were tangible, human. One afternoon, after a particularly engaging Quande session at a high school, William sat alone in his car, the chatter of excited students still ringing in his ears. A high school senior had asked him what he wished he had done differently when he was their age. The question had caught him off guard, and his answer, though honest, felt incomplete. "I wish I had looked around more," he'd said. "I was so focused on the next step that I forgot to notice where I was." Now, in the quiet of the car, he felt the weight of that statement. For years, his world had been narrowing, confined to the metrics of power. Now, it was expanding, and he wasn't sure if he had the words to explain how or why. Ava called him that evening. Her voice held a note of excitement. "We've been invited to speak at the upcoming Community Leadership Forum," she said. "It's a great opportunity to share what we've been doing and encourage other cities to replicate our model." "That's incredible," William said, pacing his living room as he processed the news. "I'd be honored to join." "Good," Ava replied, a smile audible in her tone. "You've become a part of this story, William. People need to hear it." The forum was a major event, attended by local and national leaders, nonprofit heads, and corporate giants who had the power to scale such initiatives. The thought of speaking in front of them felt different from addressing his firm's partners or a classroom of teenagers. This was the next level, and it mattered. The night before the forum, William sat in his hotel room reviewing his speech. The room was standard: crisp white sheets, abstract art on the walls, the distant hum of city noise filtering in through the window. His notes were scattered on the desk, interspersed with pictures and testimonials from students who had benefited from the programs. He rubbed his eyes, fatigue setting in. Just as he reached for his phone to check the time, it buzzed with a message from Marcus. "We're proud of you. Tomorrow is just the beginning. See you in the morning." The words brought a flicker of calm. He responded simply, "Thanks, Marcus. I'll be ready." Across town, Ava and Daniel sat in their living room discussing the upcoming forum. Daniel leaned back, watching his wife as she outlined the points she wanted to highlight in her speech. "William has come a long way, hasn't he?" Daniel said, more statement than question. Ava nodded, her eyes reflecting pride mixed with the cautious optimism she carried in her work. "He has. It's like watching someone discover a new part of themselves, one step at a time." Daniel smiled, taking her hand. "It's good to have partners who are in it for the right reasons." The next morning, the conference center was alive with activity. Attendees filled the room, their voices blending into a symphony of expectation. The air buzzed with anticipation as panelists took their seats on the stage. William adjusted his tie, feeling the familiar prickle of nerves. Beside him, Ava exuded calm, her presence a steadying force. The moderator introduced them, listing their achievements and the impact of the Pathways to Progress initiative. When it was William's turn to speak, he stood and surveyed the room, his eyes catching glimpses of young faces mingled with seasoned executives. "When I first started this journey," he began, his voice carrying across the room, "I didn't know what I was looking for. I thought success was a path marked by achievements you could tally and display. But then I met people who showed me that true success is measured by the doors you open for others." The room grew quiet, each word sinking in. He spoke of the students who had challenged his perspective, of Ava's relentless commitment to change, and of the lessons that couldn't be learned from balance sheets. As he spoke, Ava watched with a blend of satisfaction and curiosity. She could see the transformation in William, not just in his words, but in the way he carried them, in the authenticity that rang true. When Ava took the podium after him, she built on his words seamlessly. "It's not enough to recognize the need for change," she said. "We have to be willing to step into spaces that make us uncomfortable, to question the stories we've told ourselves about success and power." The applause that followed was thunderous, But it wasn't the polite, expected kind William was used to. It was charged with approval, with shared vision. After the session ended, a line of attendees formed to speak with the panelists. CEOs, nonprofit leaders, and students approached, each with questions or words of encouragement. William found himself deep in conversation with a young entrepreneur named Jada, who spoke passionately about expanding tech education in underserved communities. "I'd love to partner with Pathways to Progress," she said, her eyes bright with ambition. "There's so much overlap between what we're doing and your mentorship programs." "That sounds promising," William said, exchanging contact details with her. The conversations continued, each one adding fuel to the fire that had started on the flight to Atlanta and now burned steadily inside him. Ava approached as the crowd thinned, handing him a bottle of water. "You were right," she said, leaning in slightly so only he could hear. "This was exactly what we needed." He took the bottle, their hands brushing briefly. "It feels bigger than anything I've done before," he admitted. "It is," she said, her eyes serious but soft. "And it's only going to grow from here." The day wound down, and William returned to his hotel room, exhaustion and exhilaration battling for dominance. He sat by the window, looking out at the cityscape with its twinkling lights that seemed to echo the energy still buzzing inside him. A knock at the door broke his reverie. It was Marcus, carrying a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. "Thought we could use a toast," Marcus said, setting the glasses down and pouring a generous amount into each. William took the glass, the amber liquid catching the light. "To what?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "To finding purpose," Marcus said, clinking his glass against William's. They drank, the warmth spreading through William's chest. "Thank you for pushing me to do this," William said after a moment. "I didn't realize how much I needed it." Marcus chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "None of us do at first. But once you start, you can't go back." The two sat in companionable silence, watching as the city settled into the quiet hum of night. William thought of the students he'd met, the stories he'd heard, and the possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time, the future felt open, not just for him, but for everyone they were helping to lift. And with that, William knew that the path he was on wasn't just a detour from his old life. It was the beginning of something lasting. The morning after the forum, William woke to the faint glow of sunrise filtering through the hotel curtains. The memories of the previous day replayed in his mind. The applause, the conversations that lingered long after the event, the quiet toast with Marcus. There was a subtle shift in how he viewed his place in the world now, not just as an architect of deals, but as an enabler of futures. He reached for his phone and found a message from Ava. "Great work yesterday. We're already getting emails from people who want to collaborate. This is bigger than we imagined." A sense of pride welled in him. He typed back, "It's just the beginning. Let's keep building." After a quick shower and a light breakfast, William prepared for the last meeting of his trip, a follow-up session with Ava and Daniel to discuss next steps. The morning air was cool as he walked to the community center where they were meeting, the quiet hum of the city around him amplifying his thoughts. The conference room at the community center was filled with the familiar sight of whiteboards scrawled with notes and tables covered in papers. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and Ava stood beside him, reviewing a spreadsheet. "Morning, William," Daniel said, offering a nod. The energy in the room was less formal, marked by the camaraderie of people who had moved from cautious collaboration to shared ambition. "Morning," William replied, taking a seat. He glanced at the whiteboard where Ava had written key goals: expand outreach, secure long-term funding, enhance mentorship engagement. "So, we're already seeing a response from yesterday's forum," Ava said, tapping the list with her pen. "Several corporate leaders reached out this morning, wanting to know how they can get involved." "That's exactly what we need," William said, leaning forward. "We should capitalize on this momentum. I can follow up with my contacts in tech and manufacturing. They could provide internships and training programs." Daniel's eyes gleamed with approval. "If we can get commitments from those sectors, it will set a precedent. Other industries will want to follow." Ava smiled, an expression that carried both determination and gratitude. This is the kind of shift we've been hoping for. They spent the next hour sketching out a roadmap, who to reach out to, how to structure proposals, and the logistics of scaling the mentorship programs. Ideas bounced between them effortlessly, the synergy palpable. As the meeting wrapped up, Ava caught William's eye. "Thank you for stepping into this," she said quietly. "It means more than you know." William met her gaze, a rare moment of vulnerability softening his features. "I think I'm finally starting to understand that," he said. Before leaving the community center, William took a detour down one of the hallways lined with photos of past student programs. Smiling faces beamed from pictures of workshops, science fairs, and mentorship panels. He stopped in front of one particular photo, a group of students clustered around a table deep in conversation, their eyes alight with curiosity and hope. A voice from behind startled him out of his reverie. "That was last year's cohort. They were incredible," Ava said, stepping beside him. "They look like they're ready to change the world," William said, the admiration in his voice unfeigned. "They are," Ava replied. "All they need is a chance." William turned to her, the question on his mind pushing its way out. "What first sparked this for you? This drive to help?" Ava's smile softened, and she glanced at the photo. "My father was a school principal in a neighborhood where resources were scarce. I grew up seeing how hard he worked, how much he believed in every student. It was his dream to create a bridge between potential and opportunity, and it became mine too." William nodded, the story resonating in a way that made the work they were doing feel even more vital. "Your father must have been proud." Ava's eyes shimmered with unshed emotion. "He was, and I like to think he'd be even prouder now." They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in the weight of shared reflection. It was a silence that spoke of trust, one that didn't need to be filled with words. The flight back to Manhattan felt different than the one that had taken him to Atlanta months before. William sat by the window, watching the clouds shift and break apart like the layers of his old life. He thought about the panel at the community center, the students' questions, and Ava's story. The work waiting for him in New York no longer felt like the centerpiece of his existence, but part of a larger tapestry. When he landed, his assistant Josh met him at the airport. "Welcome back, Mr. Porter," he said, taking William's carry-on with practiced efficiency. "Thanks, Josh," William replied, stepping into the car that would take him to his office. As they navigated the familiar streets, he couldn't help but notice how unchanged everything looked. Yet, he felt like he was seeing it for the first time, each corner alive with the realization that the city was more than a backdrop. It was a place filled with potential stories waiting to unfold. Back at the office, William dove into the new phase of work. He reached out to contacts, scheduled meetings with CEOs interested in partnering with Pathways to Progress, and strategized with James and the senior partners on how to integrate mentorship initiatives into their overall business plan. The first call was with Catherine Liu, a leader in the tech industry known for championing educational outreach. As they discussed potential partnerships, William felt a thrill of purpose, the conversation charged with possibilities. "We're interested, William," Catherine said, "but we need to ensure this isn't just a PR stunt. The students need real experiences, mentorships that aren't just shadowing, but hands-on learning." "Absolutely," William agreed, his voice resolute. "We're committed to making this authentic, something that students can carry forward into their careers." "Then let's make it happen," Catherine said. "I'll have my team draft a proposal for how we can integrate our tech workshops with your mentorship programs." As the call ended, William sat back in his chair, a grin breaking through the usual mask of corporate detachment. The pieces were falling into place. 2 weeks later, Ava visited New York for a conference. They arranged to meet at a cafe near William's office, the same one where their partnership had first been cemented. The conversation flowed easily, moving from the logistics of upcoming programs to lighter topics that hinted at the friendship forming between them. "Marcus told me about the company's signing on," Ava said, her eyes bright with excitement. "This is more than we expected." William sipped his coffee, nodding. "It's growing beyond us, Ava. That's how it should be." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Ava leaned in slightly. You know, when we started this, I wasn't sure where it would go. But seeing how committed you've become, it's changed how I see things too. William met her eyes, the sincerity there making his chest tighten. It's not just business anymore, it's something more. And as they sat there, surrounded by the noise and motion of Manhattan, William felt the final pieces of his old self fall away. He was not just William Porter, the successful businessman. He was now part of something bigger, something that measured its worth not in profits, but in lives touched. The following months were a whirlwind of activity as Pathways to Progress expanded its reach beyond Atlanta and New York. The collaboration between William's firm, Ava's programs, and new corporate partners started to yield tangible results. Summer mentorships turned into year-round initiatives, and the waiting lists for student participation grew longer. William found himself busier than ever, but the nature of his work had shifted. Instead of merely navigating high-stakes mergers, he was drafting proposals for educational workshops and meeting with nonprofit leaders to discuss funding strategies. His calendar, once filled with meetings focused solely on profit margins, now included calls with community organizers and mentorship panels. One such panel was held at a large high school in Brooklyn. The auditorium was packed, the hum of excitement punctuated by bursts of laughter and chatter. William stood backstage, waiting for his turn to speak. He glanced at Ava, who was talking to a group of students, her expression animated as she gestured with her hands. "Ready?" she asked when she noticed him watching. He nodded, feeling a familiar prickle of nerves, but also something new: anticipation. The stage manager called his name, and the crowd hushed as he stepped forward, the bright lights making the sea of faces a blur. "Good afternoon," William began, his voice resonating through the space. "I'm here not just to talk about what's possible, but to show you that those possibilities can become reality. The path to success isn't always straight, but it's made easier when someone reaches back to guide you." He shared stories from the mentorship programs, highlighting the students who had taken their first steps toward careers that once seemed out of reach. The audience listened, their eyes reflecting curiosity and hope. William felt a surge of purpose that was far removed from the satisfaction of landing a big client. This was more enduring, more human. After the panel, the students mingled with the speakers. William walked among them, answering questions and shaking hands. One student, Maya, approached him, her notebook clutched to her chest. "Mr. Porter, I want to be an architect," she said, her voice steady but filled with hope. "But my school doesn't offer advanced math courses. How do I catch up?" William crouched slightly to meet her eyes. "That's a great goal, Maya. We can't change where we start, but we can change how we move forward. I'll make sure we set up extra math tutoring sessions as part of our program." Maya's eyes widened, and a smile spread across her face. "Really? Thank you." "You're welcome," he said, feeling the genuine gratitude settle over him like a warm blanket. Ava joined them, catching the tail end of the exchange and nodding approvingly. "That's exactly why we do this," she said, after Maya walked away to join her friends. "Yeah," William agreed, watching the students who filled the room with dreams and questions. "It is." Despite the progress, not everything was smooth. The logistics of managing partnerships and scaling programs strained resources and required long hours. Pushback came not just from a few senior partners at William's firm, but from some of the newer companies who were cautious about committing fully. During a meeting at the firm, James voiced concerns that echoed the doubts of others. "William, this is all well and good, but we're putting significant resources into these initiatives. What happens if it becomes unsustainable?" William sighed, leaning back in his chair. He had anticipated this. "We're building partnerships that don't just rely on one source of funding or one group of volunteers. It's about creating a system where investment begets investment. The students we help now become the advocates and professionals who give back later." James folded his arms, his brow furrowed but less tense. "I hope you're right." "I am," William said, conviction hardening his voice. "And if you come to the next panel, you'll see why." The next panel was a success, showcasing students who had completed summer internships and were now applying for college or starting new jobs. Even James showed up, nodding thoughtfully as he watched the students speak with confidence and enthusiasm. To mark the first anniversary of Pathways to Progress, Ava and Daniel organized a celebration event in Atlanta. The ballroom was filled with supporters, mentors, students, and their families. The stage was decorated with photos of past programs and banners, displaying the program's motto, "Building Bridges to Tomorrow." William stood at the edge of the room, watching as Ava spoke with a group of parents. Marcus joined him, holding a glass of sparkling water. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Marcus said, tipping his glass slightly. "It does," William admitted. "Better than I ever expected." The evening speeches began, and Ava took the stage, her presence commanding but kind. She spoke of the journey so far, the challenges, and the victories. Her voice carried emotion that resonated through the crowd, reminding everyone why they were there. "Tonight, we celebrate the students who dared to dream bigger and the mentors who believed in them," Ava said, her eyes catching William's for a moment. "We've come a long way, but this is only the beginning." The applause was loud and genuine, and as William stepped up to add his thoughts, he felt the weight of expectation. But instead of fear, there was only resolve. "I've spent most of my career chasing success," he began, scanning the crowd. "But it's here, in rooms like this, that I've found its true meaning. It's not in the balance sheets or the stock prices. It's in each story. Each person who leaves here believing that they can achieve what once seemed impossible." The room stood in a standing ovation, the applause rippling through the crowd and settling into William's chest like a promise. After the speeches, the room filled with laughter and conversations as attendees mingled. William walked over to Ava, who was sipping a glass of water and watching the crowd with a satisfied smile. "You spoke beautifully," he said, his voice warm with admiration. "Thank you," Ava replied. "You did too. I think the students were especially inspired by your story about Tyrone." William chuckled. "I hope so. He's doing great, by the way. Just got into his first-choice college." "That's what makes this worth it," Ava said, her eyes glistening. "Seeing them succeed, knowing that what we do matters." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise around them fading into a background hum. It was Daniel who eventually joined them, clapping William on the back. "We've got some work ahead of us," Daniel said, his tone a mix of pride and anticipation. "But tonight we celebrate." "To that," William said, raising an imaginary glass. "Tonight we celebrate." The morning after the event, William sat at the airport, waiting for his flight back to New York. The lounge was quiet, the muffled sound of announcements echoing through the space. He sipped his coffee, thinking about the year that had passed and the road that stretched ahead. His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Well done. Let's touch base next week." He replied, "Absolutely. Thanks for everything, Marcus." Ava's message came next. "Safe travels. Proud of what we've built." William typed back, "Me too. See you soon." As he boarded the plane and settled into his seat, William looked out at the expanse of the runway. The engines roared to life, and as the plane lifted off, he felt the familiar rush of ascent. But this time, it was different. This time, he felt as though he was flying toward something meaningful, not just away from the past. The cityscape below shrank, the world expanding as the plane climbed higher. And as the clouds swallowed the ground, William knew this was only the start of what was to come. A legacy built not by standing alone, but by lifting others. When William's plane touched down in New York, the city greeted him with its familiar, relentless energy. The skyline seemed to shimmer against the late afternoon sky, a mosaic of concrete and ambition that mirrored his own past. This time, however, he felt less like he was returning to an old version of himself, and more like he was carrying pieces of the journey back with him. His assistant, Josh, was waiting at arrivals, holding a folder of documents and wearing his usual efficient expression. "Welcome back, Mr. Porter," he said, falling into step beside William as they moved toward the car. "Thanks, Josh." "Anything urgent?" William asked, scanning the folder. "Just the quarterly report and a few partnership proposals from last week's panel," Josh said, his tone professional but hinting at curiosity. I heard the event in Atlanta went well. It did, William said, a hint of a smile breaking through. Better than I expected. As they drove into the city, the buildings loomed larger, their silhouettes sharp against the setting sun. William's phone buzzed with notifications, but he let them wait. The noise of honking cabs and murmurs of the sidewalk felt different now. Less like a relentless reminder of competition, and more like a background hum that made the city feel alive. When he arrived at his office, the familiar space seemed different, marked now by the purpose that had taken root over the last year. The large glass windows still offered their sweeping view of the city, but William found himself drawn more to the framed photos lining his shelves. Some were new additions, pictures from panels, group shots with students, a snapshot of Ava, Marcus, and him at the recent mentorship event. James knocked on the open door before stepping in. "Welcome back," he said, his tone more relaxed than usual. "Heard the Atlanta event was a hit." "It was," William replied, leaning back in his chair. "We've got commitments from a few new partners who want to support the mentorship programs. This is just the start of broader opportunities." James nodded, crossing his arms as he shifted his stance. "I'll be honest, William. A year ago, I didn't see this going anywhere beyond good PR. But it's changed the way the firm operates, and how people look at us. I can't argue with that." The admission felt significant, a silent acknowledgement of the risks William had taken and the success that had followed. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, sincerity threading his voice. James gave a rare smile before excusing himself, leaving William alone with the quiet validation that small victories often bring. The following week, William sat in a conference room surrounded by a few of the firm's partners and representatives from Pathways to Progress, including Ava and Marcus. Charts and projections were displayed on the screen behind them, outlining the potential for the expansion of the mentorship programs into additional cities. "We're looking at Boston, Chicago, and San Francisco as our next targets," Ava said, pointing to the map highlighted with the locations. "Each city has unique challenges, but they also have strong community ties that we can leverage." William nodded, glancing at Marcus, who added, "The key here is consistency. We need our partners in these cities to understand that this isn't a one-time investment. It's a continuous commitment." One of the partners, Karen, spoke up. "What's the timeline for expansion, and how do we ensure that our involvement is sustainable?" William met Ava's eyes briefly before replying. "We'll start with pilot programs, assess them after 6 months, and refine the approach before a larger rollout. Sustainability comes from creating a network, local businesses, schools, community leaders. It's about building relationships that outlast any individual contributor." Karen nodded, seemingly satisfied. As the meeting concluded, Ava lingered, watching as the room cleared. She approached William, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Are you ready for what comes next?" she asked, her voice low but filled with anticipation. William looked at her, a smile softening his features. "More than I've ever been." A month later, William attended a gala in New York that celebrated business leaders who had made significant impacts in their communities. The room was filled with people dressed in black tie, the sound of a string quartet drifting through the air as waiters weaved between guests holding trays of champagne. William found himself moving easily through the crowd, exchanging greetings and nods. But his attention was drawn to a group of young people standing by a display that showcased recent success stories from mentorship programs. Tyrone, who had just started his first semester at college, was among them, his excitement palpable as he spoke about his experiences. "Mr. Porter," Tyrone called when he spotted him. "Come over here. I was just telling them about my internship last summer." William joined the group, smiling as Tyrone launched into a story about a project he had worked on, full of enthusiasm and humor. The other students listened intently, nodding along and sharing their own ambitions. When the speeches began, Ava took the stage, her presence as commanding as ever. She spoke of partnerships, change, and the belief that true progress was collaborative. Her eyes found William in the crowd, and she gave a small nod, one professional to another who had become a partner, a friend. William was asked to speak next. He walked to the podium, the sound of applause echoing around him. "A year ago, I stood in rooms where success was defined by what you could hold, count, or display. Today, success is here," he gestured to the students and the people who had gathered. "In lives changed, doors opened, and potential realized. That's why we're here. That's what we're building." The applause was thunderous, and as he returned to his seat, Ava reached out, squeezing his arm briefly. It was a moment that spoke of mutual recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of how far they had come. Later that night, William walked the quiet streets of Manhattan, the gala's echoes still ringing in his ears. The city was alive as always, but now it felt more like a symphony than a competition, a blend of stories, dreams, and voices that were all part of something bigger. He thought of Ava's words at the forum, Marcus's unwavering support, and the students like Tyrone who were stepping into a future filled with possibilities. The path had been unexpected, but it had led him to a place he hadn't realized he needed. A message popped up on his phone from Ava. "Great job tonight. We're on to the next chapter." He smiled, typing back, "Yes, we are." As he walked toward his apartment, the city lights reflecting off the pavement, William felt something settle within him. The journey was ongoing, the work far from finished, but he was no longer chasing an illusion. He was building something that mattered, one step at a time. As pathways to progress continued to expand, word of its impact reached the attention of larger national media and influential organizations. Requests for interviews came from business journals and community-focused publications. The initiative became a model that other cities aspired to replicate, and William found himself in meetings that held the potential to elevate their work onto a national stage. The National Business and Community Partnership Summit was the next major event on their agenda. Held in Washington, D.C., it was a gathering of leaders across sectors, from Fortune 500 CEOs to nonprofit directors and policymakers. The air was thick with ambition and the energy of people who wielded influence. But William's focus was clear, showing that success could be defined by who you brought along with you. Ava, Marcus, and William arrived at the summit as a unified team. The event was hosted in a sprawling conference center with polished marble floors and banners that read, "Building Bridges, Business as a Force for Good." They walked through the entrance, greeted by nods and smiles from familiar faces. It was clear that their work had resonated beyond their circle. "Look at this," Marcus said, scanning the bustling room. "A year ago, we were just getting this started. Now, they're asking us to show them how we did it." William smiled, a subtle yet proud acknowledgement. "Let's give them something to remember." The room was filled with hundreds of attendees when Ava, William, and Marcus took the stage. The spotlight was bright, but William felt steady, the weight of the audience's gaze no longer intimidating but motivating. Ava spoke first, recounting the origins of Pathways to Progress and the vision that drove it. Her words were confident, inspiring, and punctuated by stories of students who had taken their first steps toward careers with the help of the program. Marcus followed, sharing data that illustrated the measurable success of their mentorships and internships. "What we're seeing isn't just temporary improvement," he said, his voice ringing clear. "It's systemic change." William stepped forward to conclude. "We've learned that collaboration is not just a buzzword. It's the engine that drives progress. When businesses step up to invest in communities, they're not just giving back. They're building a future where everyone thrives. And when that happens, we all win." The applause that followed felt like a wave, cresting with energy, that swept through the room. As they walked off the stage, hands reached out to shake theirs, voices expressing interest and admiration. "We want to bring this to our city," one executive said, her eyes bright with excitement. "How do we get involved?" Marcus smiled, handing her a card. "We'll be in touch." With the summit's success came a deluge of meetings and calls. Companies from across the country wanted to join, and the logistics of scaling the programs took center stage. William spent late nights with spreadsheets and conference calls, coordinating with Ava and their partners to outline a feasible plan. One evening, after hours of reviewing data and drafting proposals, William sat in his office, the city twinkling outside the window. His phone buzzed with a call from Ava. "You're still at the office, aren't you?" she asked, her voice amused but concerned. "Guilty," William admitted, rubbing his temples. "I just wanted to make sure everything's lined up for tomorrow's pitch to the new partners." "Take a break," Ava said softly. "We're in this together. It's okay to breathe." William smiled, the exhaustion lifting slightly. "You're right. I'll head out soon." "Good," she said, a hint of relief in her tone. "We're making real progress, William. Don't forget to enjoy it." After they hung up, William sat in silence for a moment, Ava's words settling over him like a blanket. The hustle, the urgency, these were familiar. But now, they were balanced by purpose. With growth came challenges. The expanded programs required more oversight and funding, and not every partnership went smoothly. Some companies, once eager, hesitated when they saw the long-term commitment needed. There were tense calls and moments of doubt that crept in during the late hours. In one heated meeting, a CEO from a tech company voiced concerns. "We need more assurance that this isn't just good for optics, but for business. Our board needs tangible results." William met the man's gaze evenly. "The results are real and they're long-term. We're not selling a quick fix. We're building a workforce that's ready and engaged, young professionals who can bring fresh perspectives to the table." Ava, who sat beside him, leaned forward. "And this is a chance to set an example, to be on the leading edge of what corporate responsibility should look like. The question isn't whether it's worth it, but whether you're willing to be part of something bigger than quarterly earnings." The room was quiet, the CEO considering their words. Finally, he nodded, though the caution in his eyes remained. It wasn't a definitive victory, but it was a step forward. As summer turned to fall, William found himself invited to an awards ceremony hosted by a prominent nonprofit that recognized leaders in community development. He attended with Marcus, Ava, and other members of the Pathways to Progress team. The evening was elegant, with chandeliers casting golden light over the tables and the murmur of conversation filling the space. When the time came for the awards to be presented, William was genuinely surprised when Ava stood at the podium and announced his name as the recipient of the Corporate Leadership for Change Award. William Porter has shown that change is possible, even in places where it's least expected, Ava said, her eyes finding him in the crowd. His journey from focusing solely on personal achievement to fostering opportunities for others has been inspiring and impactful. The applause felt different from any he'd heard before. It wasn't for a deal closed or a market gain, it was for something more lasting. He stood and walked to the stage, accepting the plaque and meeting Ava's gaze. "Thank you," he said, clearing his throat. "This award isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who believed that success is measured not by what you get, but by what you give back. And I'm proud to be part of a team that embodies that every day." As he returned to his seat, the applause continued, and Marcus clapped him on the back. "Told you this was only the beginning." William nodded, a feeling of contentment spreading through him. The path he was on was no longer just his own. It was one paved by many hands, all reaching out to lift each other. With momentum still building, the team shifted focus to ensuring the programs were sustainable. They worked on creating alliances with educational institutions and local governments, building a structure that could support itself even if corporate partnerships fluctuated. Ava and William often met late into the evening, reviewing plans and discussing the broader vision. One night, as they sat in a conference room lit only by the glow of their laptops, Ava paused, leaning back in her chair. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't met on that flight?" she asked, a touch of humor in her voice. William chuckled, looking up from his notes. "All the time. That flight was a turning point. For both of us," Ava said, her smile softening. "It's funny how life works. How one small moment can lead to something so big." William nodded, a sense of gratitude filling the room's silence. "It makes you pay attention to those moments, doesn't it?" "It does," Ava agreed, "and it makes you realize that the work is never really finished. But I'm glad we're in it together." The quiet between them was full, not empty, marked by the understanding that came from shared purpose. The journey ahead would still have its challenges, but they knew they were part of something that would outlast them. A bridge built for others to cross. As winter approached, the programs under Pathways to Progress continued to thrive. Ava, William, and Marcus worked tirelessly to expand outreach while also refining the quality of mentorship and training sessions. Their influence now reached as far as Los Angeles, where local leaders were preparing to replicate the model. The national spotlight grew, turning their work into a beacon for others who sought sustainable community engagement. One morning, William received an email from Sarah Mullins, a journalist for a renowned business magazine. She wanted to do an in-depth piece on Pathways to Progress, focusing on how a corporate giant like William's firm had pivoted to become a leader in community-driven initiatives. The interview took place in a conference room filled with sunlight, the city below a maze of streets and movement. Sarah was sharp, her questions probing yet fair. "William, many people see community work as secondary to the bottom line. What changed your perspective?" she asked, pen poised over her notebook. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "For a long time, I believed success was defined by personal achievement and profit margins. But then I met people, students, community leaders, colleagues, who showed me that success is deeper. It's about leaving a legacy that benefits others, not just yourself." "And has that changed how you measure your own success?" Sarah asked, a slight smile suggesting she already knew the answer. "Yes," William said without hesitation. "Now success feels incomplete unless it's shared." The next challenge came unexpectedly. One of the major corporate sponsors they had relied on for funding suddenly backed out, citing economic uncertainty. The news hit hard, sending a ripple of concern through the team. Meetings were hastily called. Charts and financial forecasts spread across tables as they discussed how to move forward without compromising the programs. Ava paced the room, her brow furrowed as she spoke. "We need to find another funding source, and fast. We can't let this affect the students." William looked around at the concerned faces of the team, a familiar determination rising within him. "We've come too far to let one setback derail us," he said. "I'll reach out to some of my contacts who have been on the fence. They need to see this as an opportunity to step up." Marcus nodded, his expression resolute. "And I'll touch base with local grant organizations. We've proven our impact. Now we just need to show them it's worth investing in." The next week was filled with a flurry of calls, meetings, and proposals. William spent late nights drafting personalized pitches and attending events where potential sponsors gathered. He spoke candidly, sharing not just numbers but stories of students like Maya, who had found her path to becoming an architect because of Pathways to Progress. Gradually, their efforts bore fruit. 2 new sponsors signed on, one being a prominent philanthropic organization led by a former colleague who had been inspired by William's transformation. The financial gap was bridged, and the programs continued without interruption. The renewed momentum led to more than just funding. It sparked a wave of interest in mentorship and community involvement across different sectors. Schools that hadn't previously partnered with Pathways to Progress reached out, wanting to join the network. Students who had once been uncertain about their future spoke of plans filled with ambition and hope. During one visit to a high school in Queens, William stood with Ava as they watched students present projects they had worked on as part of the mentorship program. One group demonstrated a mobile app designed to help users manage their mental health, a project spearheaded by Jaden, a high school senior who had once struggled with confidence. Jaden stepped forward after the presentation, addressing William directly. "Mr. Porter, a year ago, I didn't think I'd even go to college. Now, I've been accepted to 3 universities, all with plans to study computer science. Thank you for believing in us." William's throat tightened, emotion threatening to spill over. He managed to smile. "You did the hard work, Jaden. We just opened the door." Ava turned to him as the applause for Jaden's group filled the room. "See? This is why we keep going, even when it's hard." William nodded, the applause washing over him. It wasn't just a sound. It was a reminder that they were part of a movement that extended beyond themselves. Later that month, William received an invitation to speak at a prestigious business school. The event was a lecture series on leadership, and his session was titled Redefining Success: Lessons from Business and Community. The lecture hall was packed, filled with students and faculty, eager to hear from a man who had once been known solely as a titan of finance, but was now recognized for his broader contributions. As he stood at the lectern, William took a deep breath. The faces looking up at him were a mix of curiosity and expectation, and for the first time in his career, he felt no need for pretense. "I used to think that power came from holding on to what you have and using it to climb higher," he began, his voice steady. "But I've learned that real power is in lifting others as you climb. It's in seeing that success is a community effort, not a solo act." He spoke of Ava's influence, the lessons learned from Marcus, and the courage of the students who had inspired him to shift his focus. The lecture ended with a standing ovation, and as the students lined up to ask questions, he knew that seeds of change had been planted in that room as well. As the year drew to a close, William, Ava, and Marcus gathered at Ava and Daniel's home for a small celebration. It was a quiet evening, filled with laughter, shared stories, and the comforting glow of a fire crackling in the background. The city outside was dressed in twinkling holiday lights, a reminder of both the passage of time and the progress they'd made. "To partnerships," Marcus said, raising his glass, "and to the work that's yet to come." "To the work," William echoed, meeting Ava's eyes. There was a shared understanding there, unspoken but deeply felt. "Next year, we take this global," Ava said with a determined smile. "Why stop at national borders when the need is everywhere?" William nodded, the idea sparking excitement. "Agreed. Let's show the world what's possible." As the evening wound down, William stood by the window, watching as snow began to fall softly, blanketing the city in a quiet peace. Daniel joined him, a knowing look on his face. "You've changed, William," Daniel said, his tone more thoughtful than casual. "And it's been incredible to watch." "Thanks, Daniel," William replied, his voice low but firm. "It's been worth every step." They stood in silence for a moment longer, watching as the city lights flickered beneath the falling snow. It was a scene that felt full of promise, the past and future converging in a moment of reflection and hope. And in that quiet, William realized that the greatest journeys were the ones that didn't just take you to new places, but changed the way you saw the world and yourself. If you're enjoying this story and want more compelling narratives that inspire and engage, make sure to subscribe for more content. Your support helps bring these stories to life and ensures you won't miss out on future updates and new tales.